Hello folks, this is John Billigan of the Creep Factor podcast. Tonight I have a special many of you have long been waiting for. We are interviewing residents about the goings-ons of the area around Bienville, where some of you may remember almost a year ago, several strange murders and missing persons cases took place. These cases were followed up on by the state park services and law enforcement officials. To keep a very long story I'm sure many of you are familiar with short, it ended in the entire forest being burned to the ground by a now deceased park ranger by the name of Tim Evans. Tim was convinced there was something demonic in the forest and that it led to the death of his daughter as well as the death of his partner, Wayne. Some believe he died saving the town, but many others believe every bit as much that he lost it after losing so much and snapped, killing himself and potentially trying to take down the entire town with him. Theories aside, what has been going around the area almost a year later? Well, folks, that's what I'm here to find out. Now, tonight we are going to be doing things a bit differently. Normally, we interview folks with park services about strange happenings on the job. While we will be doing that tonight, we are also going to interview some townsfolk, not with the park rangers who have compelling and strange stories about the things going on since the Great Fire. Our first interview will be with the current head of the park rangers here, Thomas Winchuck. So without further delay, how are you tonight, Thomas?
I'm doing quite well, John. Thank you.
Alright, Thomas, walk us through some of the odd things going on currently in the town. Feel free to start anywhere you'd like.
Well, to start, I want to mention the strangest thing going on out here, the forest. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's fully grown back, and stranger still, it appears to be bigger than before. It's been roughly 6 months since the fire itself, and I don't think I need to say it's strange for something that burnt down completely and even took some of the town in the fire to grow back completely in such a short time frame, and even overtake the areas burned to the ground within the town. So, to start, I'll say that's beyond unnatural. Not only in my opinion, but in fact. There are other things though, John.
Please, feel free to share at your own pace. I believe you mentioned you had some things you wanted to let us in on within your job when I talked to you a few weeks back.
Yes, that'd be a great place to start. So, since Tim's death, there have been more missing persons popping up. Initially, this wasn't the case, but as the forest has regrown, so have the oddities around the town and the missing. When I first took over, I looked into the case files linked to the strange goings-on around the area. It was while sorting through some of the notes Tim left behind, Wayne and Agent Sawyer, that I found a file marked 1/1/2019. The file was shoved within the notes. Hesitantly, I opened the file to find a message. It read, "Blessed be they who see." This message was at the bottom of the paper, but after reading it, the paper itself began to, bleed. Once the blood stopped pouring, there sat an eye. I felt drawn into it as I stared at it, and I simultaneously had the sensation that it read every thought and even my life. My fears and worries, the lies I had told. I felt it knew everything about me. This was unnerving, to say the least, but it had nothing on what happened next. The day grew dark and the windows bled in a red hue. I stood from my desk and looked outside. The sky around me was red. I didn't understand it, and I was afraid. Looking into the distance, I saw something I can't even put into words. It cannot be described, but the emotions I felt during this time can be. Fear, dread, hopelessness. I felt myself wanting to rip the flesh from my body and run. My mind began to make less and less sense, and just as I thought I was going to lose my mind completely, I felt something touch my shoulder. It was at that point I jumped out of my chair and fell onto the floor in pain. I could still hear a language I didn't understand whispering inside my mind as I looked up to see Dale, my new hire, looking at me perplexed. He informed me that he'd been trying to contact me since yesterday to let me know he had some business to discuss. Dale wasn't in town till Wednesday. The thing is, I opened that file on Tuesday afternoon. I was missing a decent period of time between the time I opened the file and the time Dale came into my office. I didn't feel as though I'd slept at all. The transition from what I was seeing in this, I guess, dream, from when I opened the file was seamless. It was as if it was happening in real time. I'm not sure what I was seeing, but I took the file, shoved it back in the folder, and locked it away. As time went on, I could hear the voices whispering something incoherently. When I'd sleep, I'd have nothing but nightmares. I'd see images I often didn't understand, and I'd wake up in a sweat. I brought a copy of the message. I think it's safe to look at it, as it seems to have no effect in comparison to the original. I've tested it on myself, and that's all I can say about that. Keep it for your own records. Anyway, to get on point again, I got a call about the woods on Friday, sometime in mid-January if I remember it right. Now, supposedly, a local named Marnie had gone into the woods and her family hadn't seen or heard from her in a few days since. We scanned the woods and found nothing. No trace of her or anything of the sort. Having nothing to go on, we checked out her home. It was there things got much stranger. Stepping in, you could feel the difference in the air. The closer you got to the house, the more off things felt. Once inside, however, it felt downright suffocating and honestly oppressive. I walked in and found all sorts of symbols I didn't understand. There was a painting in the dining room of a rose. The painting appeared to be done in black paint. A few weeks later, after testing the material, it turned out to be Marnie's blood. I'm aware of how little sense that this makes, since people don't bleed black, right? As we continued to look deeper within the home, we found more disturbing evidence that Marnie had potentially lost her mental faculties. Marnie was a single, 32-year-old woman who was very religious and very close to her family. She seemed perfectly fine mentally and was at church every Sunday according to many of her family, friends, and even the other locals. Stepping into her bedroom, though, told a much different story. Written on the walls in what was clearly blood were the words, "Always watching." Once would have been strange enough. Twice stranger still. This was written hundreds of times, and in some cases, written again at different angles over previously written messages of the same thing. Stranger still was her bed, which sat in the corner of the room. After moving the bed, there was a secret hatch. Painted on it was the same red eye. I felt the whispering grow inside my head the moment I saw it. I felt sick and keeled over. The world had changed around me and the red hue had filled the room once again. Looking up, I could see bodies intertwined. Some had no eyes, others no tongues. Some sat with mouths sewn shut, but I could hear all their voices within my head. The bodies were contorted and seemingly melted together. They all formed that damned eye, and for a moment, I believed I saw the eye blink. There was a shrill screaming, and about the time I felt my head was going to explode, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I jumped back, but came back too. Dale was there once again. I told him he scared me, and not to do that again, to be louder next time when he wanted to approach me. Dale chuckled, and then with a concern, he asked if I was okay, as he mentioned he thought the floorboards creaked plenty, and he was sure I'd heard him. Shortly after that, we went back to the station. It should be mentioned we did contact the police, and from that point forward, they worked in conjunction with us for Marnie. I intended to do the less pressing matters for the remainder of the day and headed home that night to relax and get my mind off of anything related to the case. I was watching television that night when the lights went out. The television then turned on and went to static. I searched through my house and tried the lights, but nothing. I then went back to the television, which sat at static. Confused, I unplugged my TV, but the static didn't stop, it just kept going. It was audible at first, but it was soon drowned out by the sound of dripping. It felt as though I'd lost my hearing, but I could hear the dripping. There was a flash of an image, and then another. They flashed so quickly I couldn't quite make out what they were. The power suddenly came on, and then I came to. The lights were working fine, but it was midnight. I'd lost 2.5 hours. I didn't sleep well the remainder of the night. The next morning, I loaded up on coffee and headed to work. The following workday, things got stranger yet. Every time I blinked, I'd see the flashes of some things. None of them made any sense. There was no pattern to it. The only recognizable thing was there was an eye in some of the images, and someone in one of the images. That image that stuck with me deeply was a woman hanging. This one stuck with me because while I saw it while blinking, it wasn't like the others. Instead of happening once and a new image might happen another time, it was like I blinked into the image itself. I know how that sounds. I know how crazy it seems, but that's the best way and the only way I know how to describe it. Imagine staring at a picture enough, and then suddenly you're in it, seeing it play out like a movie. That's basically how it was, but I blinked into it. I recognized the woman in the image. It was Marnie. I watched her in this memory or image or whatever the hell you wish to call it. I watched her hang herself. I saw her breathe her last breath, and soon after that she held her palms open. Marnie's palms were bleeding. The drops of blood made the same dripping sound from my experience the night before. I was snapped to once again by a call from the sheriff. She told me they'd found Marnie, hanging from a tree, her arms open, bleeding, and 2 crosses seemingly cut into her hands. I went down to check out the site, and I was at a loss. It appeared to be a suicide, but evidence said something different. I just felt something was wrong. Something wasn't right here. I don't know what it was. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out exactly what happened to Marnie. I wish I had, but I still hear the incoherent whispers even as we speak now. The nightmares have gotten much worse, and I'm presently on leave from my job, with Dale taking my place. I'm lucky to get an hour of sleep at night. It doesn't feel right. I'm terrified if I sleep whatever the hell that this thing is, that I, or whatever it represents. Well, I'm terrified I'll end up like Marnie. There's something strange still going on in this town, and I'm of the belief that Marnie didn't commit suicide. I'm of the belief that she was murdered.
Thank you for your time, Thomas, and we ask that you stay safe. Anything else you'd like to add before we end this interview?
Nothing other than to say thank you, sir, for hearing me out and covering this seriously. A lot of people think I'm crazy now, but I know what I see at night, and I know what I've seen since I initially took over. Have a good night, and if you are wise, you'll leave this town as quickly as you came.
Of course, Thomas. Have a safe night. Well, listeners, thankfully we won't be staying here too long. However, we do have some more interviews to conduct tonight, and while our next guests get ready, we'd like to deliver some updates on strange happenings elsewhere. The main one being that we'd like to give our sincerest condolences to the family and friends of Dana Hanley. She went missing shortly after her interview with us, and was recently found, sadly, deceased. We are not allowed to go into any more details, but rest assured, we will keep you updated as we learn more. In more unfortunate news, Darren J. Wendell, who you may remember as the man in Case 4 of our first Strange Things I've Seen as a Park Ranger episode, has vanished. The details behind this one are strange. In his home were strange symbols to what you had just heard about from Thomas. There was also an eye painted on his front door in blood. Since his disappearance in February, people have claimed to see a naked man sometimes floating around the lake at the park he used to work at. Those that have reported on this have been dead set on what they saw, and some are even claiming to have nightmares involving the ever-present eye. I'd like listeners to understand that I will be updating you with more information as we get it, and if things aren't solved soon, we will be going back to Montana to check the case out ourselves. In strange but less grim news, residents in California, Alaska, Delaware, New York, and South Dakota, thus far, have reported running into a man on the roadways at night who has performed strange miracles in return for a ride to a specific destination. One man, Walter Danley, of Deadwood, South Dakota, claims he has been given a winning lottery ticket in return for a ride to the next town over and some food. He never got to see the man's face, but he says he was incredibly grateful to the man and is thankful he didn't ignore the man's gift. This may be strange, but possibly explainable. We are going to be heading out to an interview with a woman in New York in the near future who claimed to have had a run-in with this man and says he cured her terminal illness. Alright, dear listeners, our next guest is ready to go. Please stay with us as we speak with
Hannah Winston. Is it okay to proceed with my story?
Yes, ma'am, you may. Real quick, I'd like to add that Hannah doesn't work for any park services. She does, however, have an incredibly strange tale to share with us. Forgive me for the interruption, and please proceed.
Alright, so I live near the forest in question. I'd say it was about the beginning of last month when I awoke to the sight of rose petals raining down upon my house. I'm not sure how to explain it, other than to say that the petals were black, and while looking at my window, I noticed a lot of people just standing in the distance. I didn't recognize these people, and they lasted as long as the storm itself. The moment the petals stopped falling, people vanished. I live near the woods as I stated previously, and all the people I saw were in the woods. These people didn't seem to cross that threshold of the woods. Now this and them vanishing before my eyes once the petals faded was strange enough, but later that night, it got weirder. I began receiving voicemails. These voicemails were from random people I didn't even know. The caller ID was filled with numbers I didn't know. I thought someone might be pulling a prank or some kind of scam on me, so I looked the numbers up. They were numbers of real people. When I attempted to get into contact with these people, they'd never answer. I tried digging deeper as I was fairly freaked out by this, only to find that the people in question leaving the voicemails were all missing or deceased. About a week later, I'm still getting these odd voicemails. I'm scared and local law enforcement just suggest I change my number, which I did, but I still got the voicemails every time. It'd go like, I'd get a call, it'd go straight to voicemail. Even if I picked up, there'd be no one on the other end, but I'd still get a voicemail. Anyway, I'm getting ready to go to work one morning, and as I'm heading out to my car, I see someone seemingly in my car. I call the police who come down to find no one. I'm screaming my head off. How can you not see him? He's right there. The officer suggests I take the day off and try to relax. So I call into work and use a sick day. I don't work the next 2 days after that, so I figured it'd be an extended weekend, and hopefully I could relax. It's still eating at me that there was clearly a man in the car. I look outside and he's not there now, but he was there when the police searched, but for whatever reason, they didn't see him. I couldn't see the man's face, just his clothing. He had pretty standard clothes and looked like he had to be about 6 foot at least. All weekend I get calls. They're usually around 2 in the morning, but at this point, I'm ignoring them and I have my phone on silent. One late Saturday night, I'm relaxing in bed and am woken by a feeling of breath on my neck. I am frozen at first, but I eventually grow brave enough to turn and see who might be there. To my horror, the man is there and trying to say something, but it's coming out all jumbled and I can't understand it. Looking closer, I noticed he has no tongue. I'm just about to call the police when he fades before my eyes. I'll be the first to admit and none of this makes any sense. I still have no clue how the voicemails are being left or why. I'm not sure what's up with those rose petals or the man. Last week was the first week I stopped receiving strange voicemails. I haven't seen the man either. I have, however, been having nightmares. In them, the woods call out to me.
Thank you for joining us tonight, and I hope you find answers, but more importantly, peace in the future. Well, listeners, what do you think of these oddities? Are they attached to the woods themselves? Could there be something else afoot? Let us know your thoughts. Moving along, we've got one more guest tonight. Now, this gentleman could not be here tonight, but did send in his recent experiences, so I'll read them for you, and they go as follows. Hello, John. My name is Winrick. I wanted to say I enjoyed the show, and also tell you about my own experiences near Bienville. I'll start out by saying I knew Tim outside of his work, and he was a good and honest man. As such, if he believed there was some unnatural or unexplainable threat to our town, I believe him. and I'm saddened by his and many other deaths around the area. My experiences around the area definitely lend credence to the fact that something odd is still happening and has been happening in the area. The thing I like to address most is the lady in the mirror. Shortly after the fire, and when it was safe to return to town again, I began hearing things in the night. I'd be laying there in bed, perfectly relaxed and listening to some of the crickets and such, when I'd feel like I was being called. At first, it was just that, a feeling. As time went on, though, that feeling changed to a soft voice. The voice simply said, "I miss you." Unsure of where the voice was coming from, I looked around. This is when I saw her in the mirror. A woman who looked maybe 18 to 20 years old, blue hair, a light complexion, almost like a doll. She wore a black dress, and as I gazed upon her, I felt a compulsion to move closer. You gotta understand, I'm a 68-year-old man. I don't get up unless it's to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Once I'm snug, you're lucky to get me up even if someone were breaking into my home. That said, in the blink of an eye, I remember suddenly finding myself in front of the mirror. It wasn't the woman's beauty that compelled me forward, though she was beautiful. It was more like a need on the deepest levels possible to follow her. I felt, if I did, all would be okay. I'd be young again. My aches and pains would go away and all my woes would be gone. For a moment, I swore I could step into the mirror if I'd want to. That said, just as I'm about to come closer, I was jolted by a phone call. My first thought it was maybe that damn Irene from church always trying to get me to sign up for Sunday prayer meetings, even though I told her I'd spend more than enough time at church, especially on Sundays, and I didn't need to spend any more time in there. If God wants me in heaven now, he can take me during my morning coffee as easily as he could from the church. I'm certainly not in a hurry. That's neither here nor there, though. It turned out to be a wrong number, and when I looked back, the young lady in the mirror was gone. Speaking of church, when I finally did make my way there the following Sunday, I asked some of our congregation about this strange occurrence. Sadly, this only got me weird looks from just about everyone except for, ironically, Irene. She told me she had a similar experience, and she believed this blue-haired woman to be an angel. Irene said she'd never felt such warmth from someone, and I agreed at the time. That's the thing about time, though. It's a tricky thing, and it does change people and circumstances. As luck would have it, Irene said she'd been interrupted by her timer going off on some late-night cookies when she was making. I began to question if this was lucky for us or if we'd missed some kind of rapture-like event. I'm an old man, and I've seen some crazy, unexplainable things in my time. My questions would be at least somewhat answered 2 weeks later when Irene didn't show up for church service. I'm not sure if you've seen the news, but around that time Irene's family left her grandchildren with her that night before. As it turned out, when they went to check on Irene and pick up their kids, as well as get her up for church, they found, well, let's just say they found Irene at home, cooking, and no grandchildren. After a further search of the premises, they found Irene in a room, praying. She was asking where the grandchildren were, and answered that they were part of a meal for the family in celebration of God's angel coming to visit Irene. When later questioned by the police, Irene said she'd prepped the children as God's angel told her to, in order to appease God. This feast required she take part in it, as well as to which she gleefully pointed out, she ate as much as she could hold in. Now, I've known Irene for years, and while she is a bit weird, she'd never have done something like this under normal circumstances. She was a very loving, albeit an annoying woman, at times who had nothing but love for her family, until one Saturday night when it was proclaimed by an angel that she make a feast in God's honor. Irene also tended to keep a journal. The police found this journal at the dining room table full of sorts of lovely things about knitting, bingo night, church, and, oh yeah, the angel. The stuff about the angel all involves some sort of devilry, about how to sew skin and being taught how to preserve meat and how to appease God. There were varying things about how to prepare for heaven, lessons about life, death and happiness. Those usually involve 6 things I'd rather not mention. I've been sleeping with noise-canceling headphones, and I've thrown out my mirror and blocked all the others in my house to be safe. You won't find old Winrick getting nabbed by some psycho angel. Nope, no way. There have been missing persons since, and most of those have vanished completely or been found dead. All of them seem to have one thing in common, the fact that they kept records of an angel that appeared to them in their mirror. Some wrote about it like psychos in their own blood in a journal or on a wall, while others simply had files about it in their computers. I'm not sure if that means anything or what the reason is for it all, but I don't ever wish to find out myself. While that may be strange enough, I've also seen weird flowery petals raining from the sky every now and again. Experienced my fair share of weird knocks at 3 in the morning, part of why I also got the headphones, and even noticed a strange increase in ravens around the neighborhood. Take all that for what you will, and thank you for listening to my ramblings. There is something strange going on out there, something strange enough that I'm glad I'm on my way out of this long road we call life. Good night. Well, listeners, it is almost that time again. I find it fascinating, and also tragic, to see the strange things plaguing this area after the fire. It seems like it's gotten stranger than pre-fire around these parts. All that said, I'd like to wrap up the show with my final thoughts and then address where the roads will be taking us next. Tonight, we heard 3 tales of very odd things going around in this area. An area I might add already plagued by other sinister and strange happenings previously. What do you think is going on with the woods? How has it grown back at such an alarming rate? And is it something within to blame for the previous strange occurrences as of late? What might be most alarming is the eye. What does it mean? Why is it here? Why are so many people encountering it? Why are they disappearing or in some cases dying? How about the strange rose petals that sometimes rain down in town? Something I should note that wasn't mentioned in these interviews tonight was that some people were getting sick when outside while the petals are raining down. It isn't everyone, and we don't have enough evidence to suggest with certainty that the petals are the sole reason for it, but records from the hospital show that there is some kind of link between certain sick patients and the petals, even if slight. I suppose my final question of the night is, who is the woman in the mirror? Is she an angel serving a higher purpose? A ghost? A demon? What do you, the listener, believe her to be? Sadly, dear listener, that is all we have for you tonight. I'd like to thank those who I was able to interview tonight, and also you, the listener. I and everyone here working on the Creep Factor podcast are grateful to you all for the kind messages you send and for your input on the show. Next episode, we are going to be heading over to Denver, Colorado to investigate a haunted park. Then, it's on to Canada, where some claim a creature lives and feeds on your mind. And we'll wrap that up with something exceptionally terrifying going on in Japan. Thank you all for listening once again, and this is John Billigan signing off. Have a great night.